I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, 3,000 people. In a large family, I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and now 2 stepsisters as well. I lived 25 plus years outside of Boston with my husband of now 31 years. I've been a full-time artist for 5 years now since we moved to Greenville. I've always been kind of creative, artsy, craftsy kind of stuff. My mother was an artist and a writer and a musician, so I got some of it, not all of it. And I kind of started with an altered book. When we moved here, we lived in a really drab apartment while our house was being rehabbed, and I didn't have a studio, so I had one tub of supplies and an old dictionary. And so I started using vintage materials like old sheet music and ticket stubs and just stuff, ephemera that I've had collected, and started building collages in the pages. So when I finally got my studio, I was able to start really expanding on the idea of building a story based on things that people collect. So, you know, you keep all those old cards and you keep all those ticket stubs and all those things, but they sit in a drawer, or eventually they get thrown away, maybe a scrapbook. And I just wanted to use those to tell a story, whether it's a story I've made up in my head or, you know, so one of my first series was a collection based on a collection of greeting cards that this woman collected from 2 men in 1950. And it was their story. It was a love triangle, 2 men sending her cards. And so that's from there that's evolved. And now I'm actually excited because I use a lot of my own family photos. So like my grandparents, great grandparents, my mother and her friends, some photos that my father has taken. So that's really how it's kind of evolving, is to use more personal things in them. I'm not very good at realism. I'm not very good at drawing. And so I really wanted to be able to express myself in a way that didn't involve a lot of realism or anything like that. And I know abstract art is beautiful, but that kind of wasn't my thing either. So I realized that I could tell stories through the collections of materials that I had, and then adding to that with layers and layers of acrylic paint and ink and modeling paste, and just to get texture and to build up the layers. So, and I try to use all original vintage materials. So when you see one of my paintings, if the background is all torn papers and stuff, it's probably from a 1950s farmer's almanac and a grain elevator receipt from my grandfather, and old sheet music and different sewing patterns and things like that. So I try to use originals as much as possible, of course, unless it's really precious, and then I will use a photocopy. I don't want to destroy someone's only family photo. I usually start my work one of two ways. I'm either inspired by a photograph, like a family photograph or something like that, or something that somebody gives me, or I realize that I have a pile of things related to this subject matter. So a beach thing, like I have a whole collection of flyers and ads from Myrtle Beach from the 1960s. So I'm like, oh, I should do something beachy, because that's kind of a beach thing. Once I've kind of got a theme going, then I find papers that are associated with the photograph, or a photograph that fits the material. So once I have the photograph, I'll scan it in and make an inkjet copy, because that works best for the photo imaging transfer technique that I do. But I'll start with an artist board. I used to work on canvas, now I'm using board. And I will use gel medium to lay down pieces of paper. So I tear things into maybe inch by inch pieces, and do layer, overlap, layering, overlap, layer. Once I have the whole thing covered in papers, then I'll do maybe a wash. I might do some stamping with some ink just to build up some texture in the background. Then I may do another layer of paint, some more stamping, maybe add some modeling paste through a stencil, which gives it some texture. And then I generally do like a horizon line in it, and then you place the photo somewhere along that horizon line, so they're set somewhere. So the image transfer I do is I take the laser copies and do a gel medium transfer, either onto other vintage paper, maybe onto vintage wallpaper, and then remove the white paper, and then that's the image transfer that I put onto the piece. So it's a little slightly raised, so it gives it a little texture. One of my favorite things to do is commission work for clients. So people have their own collection of family photos, and they'll bring a few to me or send a few of them online, and we'll have a conversation about the type of image that we want to use. You want to have it to be higher contrast, but I can play with things with Photoshop, which I often do, mess around with the contrast and the brightness. And then we talk about the person that's in them or people that are in them and what are their interests. You know, do they like history? Are they a Civil War buff? Do they like the beach? Do they, you know, did they used to sew? Those kind of things. And I try to put together materials that relate to the person, or sometimes they have their own materials already. I had one client that brought me a whole banker box full of letters that his parents wrote to each other when he was in the service. And he allowed me to use some of the originals to put in the background because he had so many. And those are some of my favorite pieces because I not only got to know my client, but I got to know his parents and their love story and how fantastic that was. So doing the commission work is really, really exciting. One of my really favorite pieces is my piece I called Tan Lines. That is a photo of my mother, my aunt, and their two friends in 1956 at a beach that my father took the photo. And the women are all exposing their backs and you can see their tan lines, which if you knew my mother, that was very risque for her. To be able to take that photo that my father took that is of my mother was kind of a turning point for me, I think. Then I really realized it's like, oh, I really love to use these old photos, and I keep trying to find more and more of family photos that I can use. So that's probably one of my favorite pieces. Hi, my name is Suzanne Woolf, and I'm a mixed media artist in Greenville, South Carolina. You can find my work at Art Mob Studios in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and also at my website, SuzanneWolf.com.